Afternoon, everyone. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It's called Measuring Success and Proving Your Impact Against Your Purpose, which is delivered by our partner Clarasys, which is a consultancy with extensive experience working with not-for-profits. So today, we're going to hear from Ruth Wilkinson, who's a Senior Sustainability Management Consultant at Clarasys, Sarah Rigby, Principal Consultant at Clarasys, Sean O'Hare, and he's also a Principal Consultant at Clarasys. So the three of them will be joined today by Phil Tunstall, who's the CEO of Legs for Africa. So before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, as you may have seen, we're using Auto AI as an audio transcriptor. So you need to click on the top left-hand side of the screen. Please use the chat function to communicate with each other, or if you have any questions to submit. You will be able to have questions submitted to the panelists only. You'll need to select all panelists from the drop-down menu before you hit the send button. Now, this webinar is a presentation that will be followed by a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to submit your questions, but please know they will be answered at the end during the Q&A session of that presentation. So finally, please note that the slides will be shared after this event. I'm now going to hand over to the team at Clarasys. So I'll see you later for the Q&A session. Sean, sorry, I'll hand over to you now.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Marlene. Hi, I'm Sean O'Hare. I think Marlene did give us a brief overview of who everyone is, so I will just kick on. I'm Sean O'Hare. I've been a consultant for about 20 years, and I look after our partnerships as well as our not-for-profit portfolio at Clarasys. Sarah?
Cool. Thanks, Sean. I'm also one of our not-for-profit co-leads along with Sean, and I've got about 10 years consulting experience. I work with a lot of our not-for-profit clients, and I'm also one of our customer experience experts, and what that means in a kind of, I guess that can mean quite a few things. So whether that's looking at beneficiary experience or volunteer experience or kind of the donor experience, really trying to work with charities to improve that end-to-end when they engage with charities. Cool. Thanks, Ruth.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here. So I'm Ruth. I've joined Clarasys to do sustainability consulting support, but before I joined Clarasys, I exclusively worked in the charity sector, and my last role was as impact and sustainability lead at the Children's Trust, and I think our CEO might actually be here today. So yeah, really delighted to have taken that on and be working on impact at Clarasys as well. I should also mention we have one of our colleagues here, Andy Warnock, who will be in the chat. So if you have got questions that can be answered quickly, he will drop you a message. And so that's why Andy's appearing in the chat. And then without further ado, also love to introduce to you Phil. Phil will be here today to talk about the project that we've just finished working on together to bring it to life from a charity perspective. So Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. So yeah, I'm the CEO of Legs for Africa. I'll give very brief background on Legs for Africa. We help people with limb loss in sub-Saharan Africa access low-cost prosthetic limbs and counselling and peer support as well. We recycle most of the prosthetic legs that the NHS discard. And we first got in touch with Clarasys because we wanted to focus on impact and how we collect data. So today I'll share my experience of going through the approach with Clarasys.
Thanks, Phil. So just before we kick off, and Ruth and Phil can talk you through that particular project, I thought it would be helpful to give you a 2-minute overview of Clarasys as an organization. So we're a consultancy, about 10 years old. It's nearly 200 of us. We have offices in London and the US. One of the differentiators, I think, for us, we're employee owned. So we like to think we're a slightly different type of consultancy because of the people we hire and the ownership model. It means that we act differently. We don't act typically like most consultancies. We make very conscious efforts about where we work and the work we do, and being close to our purpose to help us live, work and grow together and make a lasting difference. So we don't have very silo mentality. We work very openly with clients and very honestly with them and very transparently. And we work across many sectors, private sector, public sector. But I think to keep us close to our purpose, we do like to work in not-for-profit. It's something that our people drive us towards, and we're very happy to do that. So yeah, we operate at very different levels, whether it's at a sort of board level with vision and strategy, or whether it's delivering some of your naughty programs around customer fundraiser experience, or something like impact, which is what we're talking today. So happy to answer any questions at the end you might have about us, but I thought it might be helpful to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. I think I'm passing over to Sarah, unless you want to say anything more about what we do currently in not-for-profit, Sarah.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, and I guess today is about impact, but to Sean's point, we do help our clients with quite a lot of a varied breadth of things, but we always make sure that we're putting the customer, whoever that may be, actually at the centre of all the work. And I guess kind of moving on to specifically kind of what we're going to be covering today in this webinar, and what we hope to leave you guys with when you walk out the room. Obviously, it's all about impact, and the reason we kind of wanted to focus on this for this webinar is it's a common challenge that we see a lot of our charities who we work with face. They have a very clear purpose and clear mission statement, but in terms of understanding the impact they're actually having, and how does all the activity they're doing day to day achieve against their mission and purpose statement, it's really important for them to actually have a clear definition of what does that mean. So we're going to focus on things today which hopefully mean that when you leave the room, you have a clearer idea. And when we say impact reporting, what actually is that, and why is it important? How does it link to your mission, your purpose as well? And really, how does that define what good looks like for your organization? We're also then going to actually just go on to what do you need to consider to measure impact. So once you have a clear understanding of what that means, what are the enablers to enable you to actually measure the impact that you're having? And what are all the different kind of jigsaw pieces which slot together to enable you to actually measure that impact? And then finally, based on all the different parts of that jigsaw pieces, hopefully you'll leave the room thinking, where are your gaps? So what actually do you have today, and what don't you have today? And based on where those gaps are, where do you need to focus on, so that you can kind of bring all those pieces together to enable you to measure the impact that you want for your organization. So kind of to reiterate what's already been said, it's really, really nice to be here. Really excited to see so many of you here, but hopefully you can hear us. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Ruth and Phil, who's going to actually talk through our journey with Legs for Africa on this.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We are going to have a couple of interactive elements as well, so keep your ear out for those, and we'll be asking you to participate in a minute. So to kick us off, like all good things, we should start with the why. Why bother? It's really tough when you start thinking about impact. It sounds, it's a simple word and we use it every day. We thought we'd start by just quickly defining what that means. We'll go into some more depth in a minute. But when we talk about impact, we think about the information that you collect as an organization, you analyze, and then you share to prove the difference your work is making. That's our kind of definition in this context of impact. And we'll go through that in a more complex way later, but we thought we'd start with that. We've talked about this. It's really tough. Lots of charities struggle with what is impact and how can we actually measure ours. But we think it's super beneficial. So that's why we've decided to focus on it today. When we started this project with Legs for Africa, and when they first approached us about this, we've kind of summarized the 6 key reasons why we think charities should think about this. And Phil's going to take that through from a Legs for Africa perspective. So take it away, Phil.
Yeah, sure. So, well, firstly, as is highlighted in the bright pink color, we want to prove that we're doing the right work to solve the problems we're tackling. This helps keep us focused and ensures that we're not like jumping into projects that sound exciting but don't necessarily align with our overall vision. We want to maintain and engage funding. So we want to build our relationships with current funders by better demonstrating what we do, and also reach out to potential new funders. We want to support our people so our team. We want to better align our staff towards the same goal, and we want to help all of our staff feel united, and so we can like celebrate successes more. And going into this work, we also wanted informed, data-driven decisions. And by that, well, so it's like historically, we've been collecting lots of data, and some of it's sporadic. Sometimes we get different data from different partners, and we wanted to collect the right data that will inform our organization's decisions and kind of get rid of the extra data that we don't know why we collect. And that leads us to the big reason we came to Clarasys in the first place, which is we wanted a single source of truth, which is like a one-stop shop that could show the impact that we were having, rather than how we've kind of done it before, where we would have numerous emails and route through different spreadsheets every time a trustee or a funder wanted us to kind of show what we were doing. And lastly, and probably most importantly, we want to improve the experience for the people that we support. Ultimately, we want to help people with limb difference live a more fulfilling life, but we had no way of measuring the impact that we were having on people's quality of life when we went into this project.
That's great. Thanks, Phil, for sharing those. And these are all reasons that we've seen with lots of other charities that we've worked with. And what we're interested in knowing now is that we've got these 6 reasons on the page, and you might have identified or related to some of those in different ways. So we're going to ask you to get out your phone or get ready to open a web browser, because we're going to use Mentimeter, which is a tool to do a kind of anonymous online data collection, and we'll present that on a graph. It is anonymous, so you can add that and it will all be aggregated. We're going to ask you to think about where your organization is on a scale of kind of you're really good at this, you've got this nailed, to you're not really sure where to start against each of these 6 things. So I'll flick to the next screen. We've got a QR code. You can use your camera. You don't need a QR reader or anything. You just use your camera to open that, or you can use the URL link, which is just in the bottom right there. And hopefully Andy is going to post that in the chat as well. So I'll give you a minute to open up Mentimeter on either your phone or your web browser, and then just have a look at those questions there and answer them on those scales. And if you've got any questions or worries about the Mentimeter, just pop it in the chat. We'll give you a minute or so to do that, and I'll flick over now. Hopefully everyone will be there to the results as they come in. So you can also actually go at the top there and select URL code and start to put in the code. We'll just give a few more seconds to finish up those, and then we'll just have a look at the results. Great. So actually, I think what's really interesting about this is as those results have come in, you can see the graphs changing, and what we can see is it's not changing by very much. So people are all scoring themselves quite similarly, and so those trends are probably actually quite shared across those participants. So our highest score there is the top one, which is we can prove we're doing the right work to solve the problem we're tackling. Now that is essential, and I'd say it's the key priority, right? We're all here for a mission and purpose, and so proving that we're doing the right work to achieve that is vital. So that's brilliant to see that that's one of the highest scores. And then also that another 3 score is the organization leadership being driven by impact data. That's obviously also really, really brilliant. And we expected to see that high up there. So interesting to see that the 2 lower scoring pieces around single source of truth. Again, that's totally normal. We've seen that in lots of places. I've experienced that in lots of places. It's really hard because data is so challenging to collect and store centrally. And then another interesting piece there around using impact data to reward, recognize and lead people. That is a bit of a left field one, and we talked about that, and it's not always the core reason why people do this, but we feel it's a really strong benefit from doing impact measurement and reporting, so could be easily utilized. Really, really interesting. What we'll do is we'll cut back to some of these as we talk through, and then as we follow up as well, we can talk more to those scores. Great. So now what we're going to do is talk through what is impact in more detail. So we gave that very quick definition of impact earlier, but we thought it'd be useful to talk through this model. Now, likely as you've probably seen this before, it's very similar to theory of change. It mirrors that approach, and it's been published by several notable research platforms like MPC. It's probably quite self-explanatory, but I will just talk it through. So your inputs, there are things like your people, your money, your resources, basically anything that makes your work possible. Activities is what you're actually doing, and the idea is you design your activities around what you want to achieve, and those are your outputs, understandably, and that those outputs you hope lead to your outcomes. Now the challenge here is that sometimes your outputs might not lead to the outcomes you want. So when we're talking to Legs for Africa, they give people who need a prosthetic limb a leg, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person's going to be able to walk again, even though that might be why you did it. And then obviously outcomes you hope also lead to impact, and that's the next level. So someone might have a leg, they might be able to walk again, and that leads to them living a better quality of life, being happier, being able to achieve things they wanted to achieve. We obviously aim for a positive impact, but actually all of your activities might also have other impacts. They might have other outputs, outcomes and impacts, and some of those might be unintended and some of those might be negative. For example, a lot of our activities have a carbon impact, and therefore we might be having a negative impact on the world through carbon or through waste. And we also might have unintended impact where someone might have expected to receive something from us, but actually it hasn't achieved what they wanted it to achieve. For all of us pretty much here, probably this model maps across very nicely into our mission and purpose. And that's kind of at the end here on the right of impact. Your impact is leading you towards that end vision for your organization. What are you trying to achieve as your mission and purpose? So we thought it'd be helpful to talk through that model. We're now going to kind of talk through how we use this model with Legs for Africa. And to start, we thought it'd be helpful for Phil to share where were Legs for Africa beforehand when they were thinking about impact.
Sure, thanks, Ruth. So beforehand, we had a theory of change, but it wasn't really informing our daily decisions or directing us in any way. It was kind of hidden in a drawer. We weren't all aligned on the impact we were trying to have within the team. We were counting how many prosthetic limbs we refurbished, recycled and sent to Africa, but we weren't sure how well utilized they were. The data stopped as soon as they kind of got into the mobility centers. We tended to work in silos and weren't that confident what other project managers were doing in other areas of the charity. And our partners across sub-Saharan Africa all gave us data in different ways and with varying quality. We didn't have a single source of truth that painted a picture of how well we were performing. And we were collecting loads of data in pockets of our work and weren't really using that data for any purpose. And we were doing lots of activities and measuring some outputs, but not really outcomes, and definitely not impact in the way that Ruth has just described.
So that's where we kicked off. And we joined Legs for Africa for a 6-week project to help them try and kind of overcome some of those and meet those objectives we set out at the beginning. So we'll take you through how we did that, and Phil can share some of those reflections that he would share with you guys if you're considering also doing something. When we talked about how we could share this, we started to think about what model we can use, and we've come up with these 4 jigsaw piece puzzle model on the basis that you probably have some of these, you probably have some strong areas of this, but to have all 4 together makes the puzzle whole and allows you to take impact all the way through to your stakeholders at the end. We'll talk these through quickly now, and then we'll go through them more in detail. So the 4 jigsaw piece puzzles are: number 1 is answering what impact are you trying to have as an organization. So not what activities you're trying to do, not what outputs you're trying to have or what outcomes, but what's your end impact against your mission and purpose, and actually being aligned on that as an organization. Because as Phil said, some people are excited by different things and want to go in different directions. What data then do you need to measure that impact? It's really, really tough. It's hard to think about how you can collect and use that data, but truly to get the best possible, most powerful measure, it's finding that data you can collect or already collect. And then once you've got that data, you obviously need to think about how you're actually going to go about collecting it and how you're going to analyze it. And that requires people to do the collection, people to put stuff into spreadsheets. It requires the process to take it through. It requires the systems and the tech behind there, and it requires governance to oversee it all. And obviously what we're talking about here isn't a one-off situation. You want this to be a sustainable activity. And so if you've got people doing this, you want them to be able to sustain this activity. And then lastly, you know what data, you know what impact you're trying to have, you know what data you need to collect, you know how you're going to collect it. Now, what are you going to do with it? How are you actually going to meet your objectives by using this to share it? And that might be, and obviously you'll have your own reasons, but for us, we were talking about how can you use this to inform your leadership decisions? How can you report to your stakeholders, share it with your people, and improve your beneficiary experience as the most important one? So if we talk through what that looked like for Legs for Africa, and we'll share some key things that we'd suggest you do if you were thinking about going through this. We come back to the model we already introduced, and we basically spent it was kind of week 1 of our 6 weeks with Legs for Africa. We all got in a room, the entire team, and we filled 2 walls in our office with post-it notes of everything that Legs for Africa does and all the outputs they're trying to achieve and all the outcomes, and then what impact that's having. Phil, I don't know if you want to share your kind of takeaways from that day or from that activity that you'd share with the audience here.
Yeah, sure. So, well, it was great for us to all be together in the team, because some of us are spread across the country, and we went out for our big day out in London. And it was good to take a moment out of our day-to-day kind of, the everyday, so we can reflect on the organisation as a whole. And like Ruth said, we did loads of discussing, loads of post-it notes, but by the end of the day, we aligned behind the same impact statement and aligned behind the theory of change that we had developed that day. That impact statement was about the quality of life. So the impact we were trying to have is to improve the quality of life of people with limb loss in sub-Saharan Africa, which sounds obvious now I say it, but it kind of took a while for us to get there. But the great thing was the whole team were part of that decision-making process. So that helped everybody feel accountable and feel heard. And now as we progress into the kind of the latter stages and the actual data collection and the work, people are aligned behind it all now and accountable.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest challenge here is that impact statement at the end. And people might often ask kind of, what's the difference between that and your vision as a charity? And I often find that charities have a very aspirational vision that's a very far-reaching one. An impact statement should be something you can measure yourself against every single day. What you're doing should be kind of achieving that every single day. And that's probably the big challenge, and where some charities maybe have a little gap between their kind of theory of change and their mission and vision. It was quite a challenging experience to get to that single sentence. Everyone has a different way they like to talk about it and think about it. But I hopefully think, Phil, I don't know if you agree, it was really beneficial to have that impact statement at the end that we could then use to measure against. So the next stage of the jigsaw puzzle is about what data you need. And I'll just stay on this slide for a second, because I think it's helpful to think about where the data might come from. If we start on the left-hand side, it's pretty easy to collect data here. You can easily measure how many legs you're receiving and are being donated. You can measure how many you're sending to sub-Saharan Africa, how many mobility centres you're working with and community groups you're supporting. And that's where lots of organisations do lots of data collection. It gets more challenging as you move over to the right. When you look at outputs, you can start to measure how many people receive a leg, but again, it starts to become more challenging, and how many people access community support. Where it gets really hard is where you start to think about the outcomes. So they've received a leg, but actually has it helped them do the thing they wanted to do with their prosthetic limb? We'd assumed when we joined that in this instance, we thought everyone who wanted a prosthetic limb wanted to walk again. And so we were thinking, oh, we'll just measure how many people can walk again. But actually, the reality was the beneficiaries were sharing that it's important for them not just about walking, but also some might use it for kind of inclusion, for feeling like they wanted to present with 2 legs and wanted to be able to wear clothes that looked like they had 2 legs. And that is so interesting, and we didn't realize that. And so it's really important to think about that and ask the beneficiaries what outcomes they're looking for. And then obviously the data on the very right hand side, the happiness, it's really, really tough. And so we did have that realization early on, this is going to be really hard to do. But we tried, and we gave it a good go, and we'll take you through how we approached that. We obviously wrestled with the immediate, how do you measure happiness? What does that actually look like in data? And something that was massively impressive to us that Legs for Africa did, and I really advocate charities thinking about this, is ask your beneficiaries or ask the people that you're supporting, what does good look like? What does impact look like for you? And how would you like us to ask you about that, whether we've made a difference for you? And actually Legs for Africa had done a really interesting workshop, I think in Ghana just recently, and it just happily coincidental that we were talking about this a few weeks later. And one of the project managers in Phil's team shared that she'd asked this group of women who'd been supported by Legs for Africa what they wanted to be asked about and what difference they thought it would make in their lives. And they'd come up with these themes. So mobility, access to opportunities, financial independence, inclusion, agency and choice. That was what they felt getting support had achieved for them. And so we came back with, let's go for a self-identified measure of improvement of quality of life. Happiness is individual, it means something different to everyone. So ask people, what does this mean to you and how has this improved your quality of life? But we want a bit of quantifiable stuff in there. So those themes were really helpful because they can set out their goals under those and say how far they've been able to meet those through Legs for Africa's support. So that's the measure that we got to, and I don't know if you agree, Phil, but we thought it was going to be much more complex. We ended up with something quite simple, and I think we'd always say keep it simple, because if it's too difficult, we're just not going to do it. I don't know if you if you agree with that. Was it simpler than you thought it might be?
Yeah, it really was. It's, it kind of comes through. There's a kind of red, amber, or green for each person. It's like, did they achieve this target that would represent like an increased quality of life? And yeah, we imagined there'd be different measures for each of the groups we supported, or if it's a mobility centre compared to an amputee football team, we'd need to measure them in different ways. But this just tied the whole thing together, and it's kind of beautiful in its simplicity.
That's a really good point, actually, because one of our aims is to create that umbrella measure. But you don't want to just have the umbrella. You want to have the individual supporting collection underneath, where you have KPIs under each of your services, for example. But having that one umbrella measure is really important because it's so powerful, but it does tend to be more simple because of that. So we'd got this, we knew what impact they were trying to have, we knew what data we needed to collect. The really, really tricky part now is how are we going to sustainably collect and analyze this data? So we think about this in terms of 4 key areas. We know that we need the people in place to do the activity. We know they need a process to follow. We know they need systems and tech to support them and to actually collect and use the data. And over that, we need some governance to make sure all of those 3 things don't fall down at any time. And that's to sustain this activity for now and well into the future. So Phil, I don't know if you want to share any reflections about what this meant for you under each of these themes.
Yeah, sure. So with people, well, we rely on a lot of partners and people on the ground to input the data. So we had to factor that into our decision making. And we had a delivery day in Bristol where we ran simulations with everyone in different roles, like inputting the data, doing the processes, the analysis. So now everybody knows the kind of processes of all the other staff. So people can kind of step out and step in and go on holiday without problems happening. And we've kind of done similar things over Zoom and in person out with our partners in Africa, so they can like fully understand the whole process. Regarding systems and tech, we didn't want anyone using tech they didn't know about already. And we thought one of our anxieties actually was Clarasys were going to come in and say that we need a big shiny new system. But the people we work with, there's some computer literacy differences across different countries. And we just wanted to make sure people are just using the kind of the Google Sheets method that we developed already. And yeah, Clarasys were really great at accommodating that. Regarding process, yeah, Clarasys really came into their own, I suppose. The tying together of systems we already had and creating new systems where there were gaps. There was shared data inputting sheets for all of our partners, and it all fed through into this main dashboard. They also gave us a handbook for how the process works for all the different data collection points. and to make sure we could troubleshoot and make changes after they'd kind of finished and left us on our own. And regarding governance, we were given recommendations on how we could sustain and continuously improve this change. And since the work, we've set up a number of touch points so that we're always keeping an eye on the data, spotting errors and gaps, and keeping it in the conversation with staff and with our partners on the ground. I suppose the big fear is that people will kind of forget about this or start developing some kind of new system on the side. So we really want to just kind of keep it fresh in everybody's minds and keep people on it.
Yeah, I'd add to that the handbook piece, if you've got people in your charity doing this kind of work, ask them to keep a record of it and ask them to kind of log their journey so that you don't lose that valuable, because when people leave the organization, obviously you lose some of that integral knowledge, and it's so vital for work like this. If the reason a lot of charities and a lot of organizations don't have a single source of truth around data, because everybody does their own thing in data collection and reporting, and then if there isn't shared knowledge about what that looks like, new systems start to get set up. So building that kind of handbook as you go is really important as well. That's great. And so we progress to our final jigsaw piece puzzle, which is how are you actually going to use and share this data? And we talked about the kind of key areas that we feel is really important here. So Phil, I don't know if you want to share what this looks like for you and what you intend to do with this, your impact reporting, and where you think it might be helpful for you. Sure.
So, well, the project is new. Like, it's not until 6 months' time that we'll really start getting the data back and being able to analyze it properly. But we're assuming that it will inform leadership decisions. Our model at Legs for Africa sees us working with a number of different organizations who are delivering work on the ground. And we're really excited to be able to use this data to be able to measure and evaluate their work, so we can support them further and measure how successful the partnerships are in terms of impact. Reporting to stakeholders. I suppose historically we've been really good at telling powerful stories through images and videos, but this will allow us to actually back it up with some like really relevant, quantifiable like evidence data, and we can find it at the click of a button. So, and I suppose along with like the kind of normal stakeholders, you know, trustees, funders, etc. We also want to be using it to share with hospitals and government agencies out in sub-Saharan Africa. So, for example, we're learning that in Uganda, there's a large and growing number of people who are losing limbs due to road accidents. And one of our community partners there are now using some of the information that we're collecting to petition the government for better road safety laws. So there's kind of this nice side side impact, I suppose. Sharing with your people. So we found it difficult in the past to portray all the work we do to our trustees and to funders. And this dashboard that's been created gives a really good quick snapshot of where we're at and how we're performing. And it also lets us see how the team is performing, so we can celebrate successes and kind of like look at the difference we're making in a nice quantifiable way. And improving beneficiary experience. We're hoping or assuming this work will highlight those beneficiaries whose lives are not improving in the way that we imagined they would after our support. So this means we can work with them to understand what those barriers are to improvement, and we can recommend changes to our partners to help improve beneficiary experience.
Thanks, Phil. I guess the thing that I'd add there is that one of the most important things is once you've got this in place is to keep it in the conversation. So keep it on the agenda, literally, and in your board of trustees and in your leadership team meetings and on your funder meetings, so that you can make sure it's live and relevant, but that you're doing something with it all the time, because it is easy sometimes to take what data you've got for granted, and it might then fall by the wayside. So just before we go back to another interactive exercise, we thought we'd just give you a quick, this is literally a screen grab of this dashboard. It's quite simple to look at, and we just wanted to share it so that you could get a bit of a flavour of what it looks like. This is model data. We haven't shared live data from Legs for Africa. But the couple of key things I'd just suggest to take away from here are that when you've got your data and you're looking to analyze it, think about what visual is going to be most useful for your key stakeholders. In this case, you'd probably use this for trustees and for leadership team meetings. You might then create an interpretation of this for an impact report, for example, that's going externally. Colors obviously make sense. You'd want to see lots of green, and that's a really easy, quick way of seeing that. Also, you want to see that against your target. So you might set yourself a target, and we would recommend that you do set yourself targets against your impact measures so that you can see how you're performing and show that kind of reality versus target state. And then equally, if you look at this pie chart on the left, you can see here we've got 75% of the goals being achieved against quality of life. It doesn't tell you much else. It's just great to see a big chunk of green. But actually, when you start to break that down, you get some really interesting information. So here you start to see things like, we can see that most of the goals that people have set, again, it's model data, but in pretending it's real, you could see that mobility is where most people have set their goals. And that starts to tell some really interesting stories that, I don't know, Phil, if you would have known that before, we know what people were looking to achieve from having a leg, for example.
Yeah, and I suppose I'd add on that, like, mobility we always assumed was the kind of key thing to measure, but actually talking to people, it's like, well, mobility, but like for what reason? And quite often it's like the goal would be, I want to walk down the aisle on my wedding day, or I want to get back into work, or go to school, ride my bike again, that kind of thing. So actually these other measures other than mobility, like maybe are even more important, because they're the actual things that improve the quality of somebody's life. And mobility is like the gateway to it almost.
And if you do start to see those trends, for example, that walking down the aisle, that might be kind of under access to opportunity, you might, I guess, flex the work that you're doing. So, or say, actually, someone wanting to ride their bike, you might be thinking, actually, how can we put kind of get some people in to the mobility centres to help people learn to ride their bikes? Because you might actually be able to flex that work, which would be really, really exciting to see that as a result. Great. So we're going to actually just, sorry, Phil, I was about to skip over this part. We're going to let Phil just share kind of final reflections on what you would recommend the CEOs listening today to take away from this. And we'll just put this on in the background.
Okay. Oh, so yes, this video is of one of our mobility centres in Ghana. They help people get legs. They also run peer-to-peer counselling and provide a community group there. So the overall impact of our work with Clarasys has been that we can now complement the decent videos that we've got, like this one, with robust evidence. And it's galvanized the team around our main focus and the way we collect data. And it's given us all a degree of confidence that we're on the right track and we're doing our work for the right reasons, I guess. And also, one of the side benefits of doing the work with Clarasys was we learned about agile project management that we didn't really know much about before, but kind of watching the Clarasys team work every day and having these regular meetings with them, it kind of changed the way we work as a team as well, which has been really, it's revolutionary, in fact.
It's great that you mentioned agile, because if anyone is thinking about doing this kind of work, agile project management works really nicely with this kind of project. So if you are thinking about it, have a Google, reach out to us if you want to. There's lots of experts about agile out there. But yeah, recommend that as a way of approaching it because it helps you really build the best possible system. And yeah, I absolutely love that video. Couldn't resist putting it in here. And thank you, Phil, for sharing those reflections. So we're going to go to one last interactive exercise. So we've gone through the 4 jigsaw piece puzzles and then we'll open for Q&A afterwards. So we've got the 4 jigsaw piece puzzles. What we'd really love you to have a think about now is, where are you at as an organisation? You might have all of these puzzles, you might have a full complete puzzle piece and a beautiful picture, or you might have lost a couple of these pieces under the sofa along the way. Start to have a think about where you might want to do some more work or where you've got real strength and where you might want to bolster that. And then we'd just love to hear, and I'm really interested to hear what you might want to do next. So we've got another little Mentimeter that I'll just flip to on the next one, which you can access through this QR code. I'll just have to flip through as the presenter as well. And hopefully another link is coming into the chat. And we're just going to ask you to give us a couple of words, a couple of sentences, if you like, about what you could do next, what's interested you, and what you might consider thinking about, what areas you might want to work on. Just give a second. I need to flip over to it here. There you go. So hopefully that's now come up on your phone. It might just give you a little banner at the top that says the presenters changed the slides, and then just click go to slide. We'll just give you a minute or so to have a go at that. Great, so feel free to keep writing on there, but we'll just have a quick look through these. It's scrolling for me. Love this bit here that says, do not get overwhelmed. Totally agree. And Phil, I don't know if you agree that it can be a little bit overwhelming to look at this. It's so big and it covers the entire organization. But absolutely take it step by step and simplify as much as possible.
Yeah, not getting overwhelmed is essential.
I saw someone as well put about survey beneficiaries, about what impact looks like for them. Absolutely. If you can co-produce this kind of work with your beneficiaries, it will be so much more powerful. And then when you start to share that with people like your teams, your stakeholders, that will give such strength and credibility to it.
Yeah, there's a lot here about impact statements and kind of really defining that. And then once have that, yeah, like find that source of truth. Yeah, just like the one you've highlighted.
I didn't actually mean to do that. I'm just trying to make it stop scrolling. But that's helpful. Any other reflections from the Clarasys guys that they've seen? I like this one here about extracting information. You will already have lots of data in your systems, so yeah, don't go above and beyond to collect new data.
I was going to say the same about what you currently, don't throw everything away, because it might have stuff that's useful. Yeah. You probably have a lot of data. It's just a matter of looking at it in a way that gives you more insight than what you may be currently using it for. Yeah.
And for those thinking about that impact definition, using the theory of change model and really challenging yourself, and if you can get a third party who's kind of unbiased to come in and challenge you as well, to come up with that impact statement. Great. I will flick back, but feel free to add more if you'd like to. We'll be able to do some follow-up as well, so we can address those. We're going to finish our formal presentation there. Thank you very much for listening and engaging, and we'll hand over to you for some hopefully interesting and challenging questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was brilliant.